Hi, everyone, and welcome to part 4 of the Teacher series, where we talk about how to start, strengthen, improve, make awesome your school's debating club if you are a teacher doing some debating. And if you are a teacher doing some debating in your school, you're awesome and we appreciate you, and your students will as well. So, we want to talk today about why we focus on content over style. So you may have noticed in previous videos that we've talked a lot about how when we're giving initial feedback, particularly to novices, we're focusing on content feedback. Things like structure, things like explanations, why is something true, why is something important, rather than things like eye contact, body language, using rhetorical devices such as alliteration or the power of three. I really hate that sort of stuff, and we're going to find out why soon. um, but you may be wondering, why aren't we focusing on style? And you may think that maybe standout speaking isn't for you, or our way of doing things isn't how you would like to do things, because what you're interested in, quite understandably, is style. What you want your kids to do is become stylistic speakers. Well, that's also what we want, right? Like, ultimately, our aim as debate coaches and public speaking coaches is not exclusively, and we can talk about that a bit more, but yeah, we want our students to be engaging, witty, charismatic speakers. However, to get there, we first have to have content. And that's what this video is going to be about. And it's going to be very important when we talk in the next video about how to select a format to train in and to compete in, because we are, spoiler, going to advocate a content heavy format such as BP. So the way that I often explain this to teachers is what I often call the essay comparison, which is, if it doesn't make sense to you intuitively why we teach content first when we want to teach things like body language or wit, humor, confidence, try to imagine a beautiful essay with no content. It's quite hard to imagine that, right? Because it's not really a thing. Thoughts need to exist in order for those thoughts to be expressed in a beautiful or interesting manner. Great speeches always have an underpinning of interesting truths or arguments. I have been to the mountaintop, or I have a dream, or the sort of pickup truck speech by Robbie Kennedy in the wake of Dr. King's death. These speeches were rhetorically very beautiful, and there was a lot of style and impressive, you know, things going on there, but they were also saying real stuff. They were making real points. They weren't talking about nonsense. All the great speeches I've ever seen, probably all the great speeches you've ever seen, there's been really important material at the heart of it. And so you need some content for a speech to be great, and this is still true for debating. Now, what then happens is we say, okay, well, let's give them a couple weeks to come up with some good content. Give them 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks to prepare. They can do the research. They can, they can learn about whatever topic we're discussing. They can practice it, and that way they'll have content, and then we can focus on the style. And this is a way of doing things, but the problem there is that a student is putting in a lot of work to maybe only do one practice speech a month, and they're maybe spending hours researching and preparing and writing, and then only 3 minutes, 5 minutes talking. That's not a good use of time, because ultimately what makes people better at public speaking is public speaking. Practice is always going to be paramount in almost any discipline, and definitely in public speaking. So we like short prep formats, such as usually BP, where you hear the motion and you get to speak in 15 minutes, because that way the ratio of time spent prepping to time spent speaking is not 1 to 1, but it's maybe 3 or 4 to 1 rather than 20 or 30 to 1. That way, a student might only rock up to debate club for an hour every week and might spend no time outside of that doing anything debating like, but they're still giving a speech every week. And that's really, really good for their improvement. If you want a student to hear a topic, research a topic, think about a topic, come up with really good thoughts about that topic, and then prepare a speech about that topic, you're asking them to commit hours and hours and hours to debating for every single speech they give. That's not a good ratio of prep to practice. And here's the thing, right? When we start debating, students don't have readily available a lot of thoughts. Certainly not cogent, incisive, fleshed out thoughts, because very few human beings do. And certainly I didn't when I was 15. And I've sort of said sorry here because I don't want to insult your students, but most teenagers, you give them a topic, whether it's banning zoos or legalizing drugs, they might have some opinions, but they're unlikely to have really well thought out, considered, nuanced opinions that they can explain. Not at first. And this is something that debating teaches. What we want is to help students get better at thinking deeply about emotions and coming up with points, coming up with ideas for and against something. That is a skill. It's a skill of debating, just like public speaking is a skill. And it's a very useful skill for essay writing and for interviews and for a bunch of other things. But importantly, for our purposes of creating great stylistic speakers, if they can come up with content on the spot, and if they can come up with arguments in 10 or 15 minutes, that means that we can give them a different topic every week, maybe 2 times a week, maybe 4 times a day for a competition, and they can do one speech a week, or 2 speeches a week, or 4 speeches in a day if it's a competition, and it's different speeches on different topics, and they're getting so much practice, and that really will make all the difference. Practice is paramount. So, just as a sort of anecdote, a few years ago I was involved in a very large public speaking competition that I've been involved in quite a few times. And the basic premise of it is there are 50 or so national public speaking competitions run by this organisation, and then the winners of each national competition come to one city for, like a World Cup, an international competition. And in the national competition, they're all giving a pre-prepared speech, so a long prep speech. But in uh, the finals, the where it's just the national champions, they have to both give 2 prepared speeches and also an impromptu speech where they're given, I think it's 15 minutes or half an hour to prepare just a 3-minute speech on a topic. And what I always found astonishing about this competition was how badly everybody, not everybody, almost everybody did in the impromptu round. Out of 50 national champion public speakers, a good 40 of them had nothing worthwhile to say in those 3 minutes, and their speeches were terrible. And the reason was because they weren't able to be stylistic because they had no content. They might have had good speaking or style when there was content, but without content, they had no style. So you've got to make sure that the kids are able to come up with some content before you can start worrying about style. As in a sort of different but equally valid reason, I do find that when giving students feedback on debating and public speaking, it's often a lot easier for them to swallow if it's feedback on content rather than things like body language or tone, which tend to feel a little bit more personal. I'm not necessarily sure that's logical, but it's certainly true. I think that debating is a hard thing to accept criticism on because it does feel quite personal. It's just you and your voice. It's it's not as far removed even as a sport where you're throwing a ball, you're kicking a ball, you're doing things on a court. I think debating just it feels very much like it's just you. It's who you are. And a lot of people do struggle when they lose debates to sort of accept that emotionally at competitions. And a lot of people find feedback hard to hear at first because it does feel quite personal. But it seems easier for students to accept content feedback than style feedback. And again, when you're first getting kids through the door, when you're first working with students, when it's the first couple of years of debating or public speaking, you just want them to keep coming back. You just want them to keep practicing. You just want them to enjoy it. And so if they're going to take on content related feedback a little bit easier, great. They'll get better at speaking, they'll get more practice. The style will obviously get better as they do more and more practice just naturally. And then we can do more practice, we can do more style orientated training in the future once they're into debating, they have worthwhile things to say, and they can do real debates and real speeches. I think as well, one of the reasons that I think it can be of benefit not to coach style from the off beyond very simple things like, I literally couldn't hear you, so please speak louder, or you were speaking so fast that I couldn't understand a word, slow down a little bit. Beyond these very basic things, I think it can be quite nice to discover a student's natural style. And it might not be obvious what their natural style is when they first start speaking because maybe they only speak for 10 seconds or 30 seconds. Maybe they write everything down and read aloud rather than giving a speech. Maybe they're so nervous or they have so little thought about their topic that they don't have any ability to express their own natural style. But once they get some content and once they're doing a lot of practice, you'll find that students exude, exuberate, no, exude, yeah. You'll find that students exude their own natural style. And that style might be witty, it might be sarcastic, it might be deadpan, it might be exuberant, it might be like very sort of hands moving and doing a lot of things and doing a lot of thoughts and a lot of variation in tone. It might be a bit more methodical and a bit more chilled. That's fine. They might be very funny. They might never ever even attempt to make a joke. They might be very angry. They might be a very forceful speaker. All of this is fine. One of the key things to being a good public speaker is discovering your natural style and leaning into it. You know, Barack Obama doesn't speak like Dr. King, and Greta Thunberg doesn't speak like Emma Watson, but nor should anyone try to sound like anyone else. It's always best to sound like yourself and to lean into your natural style. So, in order for students to find their natural style, doing a lot of practice where they're not having to think about style, they're not having to worry about style, they're only having to worry about the content of their arguments can be really, really useful. Because if they're just focused on, okay, what are my points? How am I explaining these? Then their style will come out naturally because it's not being obsessed over. And then you as a coach get a chance to be like, okay, this kid's a very like naturally sarcastic speaker. When we talk about style in the future, we're going to talk about this and why this works so well for them. So we think that content is really, really got to be a precursor to style. And while if you had a student who was only going to give one speech in their entire life, and that speech was in 3 months, you don't have to worry about them getting good at generating content. You might just want to work on that one speech. For long-term development, what do we want? We want kids practicing lots of different debates, lots of different positions, for, against, speaking first, speaking last. And in order for them to take part in lots of good debates, they need to be able to come up with content quite quickly. And that means coming out with points, coming out with reasons, being able to explain them, justify them, impact them. And so we like content heavy competitions. And we're going to talk about the sorts of competitions you should try and get your students involved in, when to get your students involved in them, how to pick teams, and most importantly, why we believe all these things next time. Thanks so much for watching. Give the video a thumbs up if you liked it, it really does help. And also comment below if you have any questions or thoughts or disagreements with anything I'm saying, that'd be cool too. And if you'd like us to come work in your school or if you just want some advice, please feel free to give us an email. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, keep debating.